So basically, I'm going to go through, that, its impact on actually the consumption of your visualization, and also, subtly highlighting the relative importance of information by where you place it, how you size it. And as was talked about before, that you have density of visualization, which is really about how do you add in more information elements. Consistency is a big thing that will help people navigate your dashboards. And finally, editing out superfluous elements, because as was alluded to before, it's kind of like doing modern design, right? What do? They fill a room with furniture, and then they start taking pieces out until they actually get to what they're trying to achieve. And doing a visualization is the same type of thing. So this is what I'm going to start with. So here I'm going to talk about processing flow and how do humans actually process a visualization when they see it. So if you look at what's going on here, the first place that a person is going to look at is the upper left-hand corner if they're in the Western world. If they're Middle Eastern, they're going to start in the upper right-hand corner because they're taught to read from right to left. We're taught to read from left to right. So it's left to right, top to bottom. And so if you're really trying to get through a really important piece of data, that should be in your upper left-hand corner of your visualization. So you can kind of see in this one, I don't know, is the graffiti by Burrow, is that the most important thing on here? It would assume so because it's in the upper left-hand corner. But it also is kind of floating there with a different color scheme than the rest I'm looking at. And then next I look over to the right, and I see this plethora of pie charts. And again, I'm not quite sure how that ties back to the other one because there's no real flow in my eye that directs me that says, oh, now I see that it says to say selected as a filter. So that would indicate to me that that probably is very important because if that's what you're using for the user experience, you do want that to be up there where they can intuitively see where the filter is. But because the colors are different and because of the different sizing, it's the smallest thing on here, which would indicate to me normally that that is the least important thing I should be looking at. But then I get cognitive dissonance because it's in the upper left-hand corner. And all of this is occurring unconsciously in your user's mind. So it's something to keep in mind. Oops. Oh, boy. Okay, well, my other, I actually had another slide that was better that kind of showed this. And let me just check to see where that went, because it should be in there. Okay, well, I don't have it. So I'll have to talk to it. It was actually a visualization that was just one map. It had the map of the state of California, and it basically was showing you what kind of military equipment was given to that particular state, California, and then you could click on it by county and see what they were getting from the military to the local police department. But it's very clean because all you saw was the state of California and it was color-coded. So you knew immediately what you were looking at across the bottom of the different elements, it was changed. And so it was a very good visual cue, and I apologize for that missing. So now we're going to look at, again, the relative importance of the layout elements. And placement, again, is very important here. So you can see in this visualization that what the person has done is they've put a label and a color coding here in the somewhat upper left position. Selecting your metric is in the upper top position, which is probably not a bad place for it. But then they went down vertically. But then you'll notice down below here that bottom chart actually covers the whole length. And so again, I'm kind of like confused because, okay, this one is the largest thing on here, and I don't know, and now I'm trying to like look in between and see, and looking at the color coding, and is the color coding is the same, but then I'm seeing like down below, where's the gray, right? Because now I'm missing an element. Again, these are things that unconsciously confuse users when they're trying to consume these dashboards. And so, again, my question becomes, what is the most important thing? If the most important piece here is the year-over-year change in average daily visitors, that should be the biggest element, and it should be as close to the upper left as possible. And then what I would do is, if you wanted to go ahead and use the color legend, I would put that as a very horizontal strip between the two, because the two elements share the same color coding. But putting it right there on the left-hand side, it's like my eye gets distracted immediately by those colors, so it's going down, which is against the normal grain. And we can kind of see here, this is a much better kind of flow, because what has happened? Well, the most important thing that you're trying to tell that story is in the upper left. It's a visualization. It's got high information density. You intuitively know it's sorted in an order. That's intuitive because you can see it visually. You can see that the selectors have been moved to the right-hand side, i.e., you've already consumed information, and then you get the ability to kind of drill down and see, after you've already consumed the information, the top-level story that needs to be told here. You'll also notice that the bottom graph is the same size, width-wise, as the most important element on here. So that way, again, you're cueing to that user the idea that this is less important, it's smaller, it's at the bottom, and it's the same width. And so intuitively, that person knows, oh, the most important graph is the one on top, the less important one is down below, and then the way I select is off to the right-hand side. So now let's kind of like look at the consistency of the layout. And here I'm using two different dashboards that are part of kind of the overall kind of dashboard. And there's some navigation elements that are available in between to say, go to this one, go to this detail view, that sort of thing. But if you notice here, there's a lot of inconsistency. On the first dashboard, the entry dashboard here, the filtering elements are on the top, which again is not a bad place for them to be. But if you notice, when they've gone to the detail one of the salary overview, now all of a sudden the selectors are on the right-hand side. So again, now you have the user having to try to figure out how to use what you've given them rather than concentrating on the story that you're trying to tell. And if they flip back, there's going to be another 3 to 5 second delay while they try to reprocess, oh, where am I at? And what do I need to do in order to change this? And I'm being charitable by calling this a visualization, but as you can see, it's not. We could talk about the different elements and visualization choice, but that's not what I'm trying to demonstrate here. It's more of just this consistency that you see over and over again. If they're inconsistent, it's a problem for users. And here you can see, again, being a little bit charitable, that these are actual visualizations, but it gets the point across of the consistency. Notice that the elements are in the same order, the same place, and here, again, probably in best practice, they're down the right-hand side or perhaps across the top. It depends on how much space you have and the type of consumer that you have and where you place those. But you notice that they have the same exact consistent placement. They're in the same order, and the directions are actually there as well, a little element there to help them kind of navigate what's going on. The data elements themselves on the dashboard are laid out consistently. The information, again, is up on the top, telling them, explaining exactly what's going on that particular visualization. So kind of the last piece that I want to hit is on editing out kind of superfluous elements. And it was brought up before of like the idea of labeling. If you remove labels, it should tell the same story. And if you're repeating elements, it's an opportunity to figure out how do I place these so that way a repeating element, if I do have to label it, where does it make sense to remove those and so somebody's eye is going to work correctly? So in this case, this isn't a horrible thing, except for you have this stacked and you have these different cities, which in this case represent prisons, and their capacity and then their actual population. That's the top visualization, and that's on the right-hand side here. And the bottom in this visualization, it's the same thing, laid out exactly the same way, except for it shows you how many prison guards are actually authorized per prison and how many positions are actually filled. And the story that they're trying to tell here is a pretty powerful one, which is, hey, these prisons are way over capacity and they're understaffed for what they should have been just at the lowest level authorized number of prisoners in that particular prison. But it's not exactly obvious to you by looking at this. And part of the reason is these are stacked vertically. And so if I'm looking at Holman, I have to look, first I have to go over to Holman, then I have to look at that, and then I have to scan down and try to find Holman again and scan right again in order to actually consume this. And so it hurts the story here because the story that this person is probably trying to tell is saying, hey, we need to hire more prison guards and figure out how to reduce the populations that are in these prisons because it's just a huge problem. You have way too few people actually trying to manage way too many prisoners. So I redid this one, and I did a couple things that you'll notice. One is that I kept the same element. It basically was describing in a narrative form that, and I moved the map over to the right-hand side. And the map itself is actually used as a filter in this case. So the idea being that you could click on one of those and see the visualization change down below. But in addition, what I've done is notice I've moved these elements side by side. And what I was able to do then is remove the actual city name because that's a repeating element that I don't really need anymore. And what I've also done is moved the elements within the graph so that way you can see the same elements, right? So you see the capacity and then you see how many authorized guards there are. And those are the same color, they're on the same line. So when you're scanning across, you can see, oh, this is the capacity, this is how many guards are, that's the positive part of this. And then I look down below and I see population, oh, I see that's bigger. But because I've changed the color, you know that that is tied into the number of prisoners that are actually there, or positions filled, excuse me. And so unconsciously, what you've done is you made it very, very easy for the people to make the choice that you're trying to lead them to or tell that story that you're trying to say, which is, wow, look at that. We're over capacity, and I can see that we have way too few guards, and it takes you one scan, left to right, versus right, back, down, right, in order to try to see that. And you're also trying to, in this case, remember different colors. Why are these colors different? It doesn't really make sense because the actual data element that you're trying to compare, even though they're not the same element, they're in a different category, they are related. And so by simply just changing the color and where they're at, I've related those two particular elements in that particular visualization, and I've made it easier for the person to actually consume that type of product. So I think that is really the big thing. Be very careful about where you choose to put things and how big you make them. And because it does make a difference, even though people aren't able to, oftentimes users aren't able to articulate to you exactly why they see something, why they're getting confused while they're kind of consuming these types of dashboards or visualizations. If you actually watch their eyes, and I highly recommend this, when you roll out a new visualization to a user base, or for testing, sit down and watch their eyes as they're consuming. And you will see, if you have a bad visualization or one that's not telling the story the way that you think that you're telling it, you're going to see their eyes going all over the place. And that's a bad thing. You should really take a look at that, because they should be scanning. You should make it as easy as possible by allowing them to scan top to bottom, left to right. So kind of in conclusion, the placement of elements matters. Place the most important elements in the upper left, least important information in the lower right. The relative size of elements matter. Larger elements denote importance, and smaller elements generally cue for additional detail or just more informative consumption information. This is one of the reasons why tree maps are such a powerful thing, because they're encoding by size and color. They're encoding two different pieces of information. And then same size elements are going to denote similar importance of information. So if you have, it's self-explanatory. Denser elements convey density of information. But again, as we heard before, don't go overboard here. But if you can encode more than one thing into a particular visualization by using color, by using size, by using placement, that adds value. And it reduces the amount of space that you need in order to tell the story. And consistency cues the user. And I think that's a pretty important element. And in this presentation, I've actually subtly used consistent layouts to cue you during this exercise. And I don't know if anybody's noticed that, but did anybody notice what I did there in that particular presentation to cue you of what was going on by using elements and placement? See, in some ways, this is really good. Oh, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah, so, right, so there was consistency, but I also encoded a lot of information subtly, and the fact that people haven't necessarily picked up on it, but I bet you unconsciously did. If you notice, all my bad examples were on the right-hand side. All my good examples were on the left-hand side. That every time I moved to talk about a new element or in the presentation, it was bold. Everything else was grayed out. And when I finished talking about a topic, there was a line and it was grayed out as we moved through. So subtly, that's what I'm talking about, subtly cueing people to consuming, because even though you may not have been consciously aware of that or been able to articulate it, you automatically knew probably by the third slide that the bad example was going to be on the right-hand side, even if you couldn't come out with it and say that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and conclude my presentation. Do I have questions?
On your example with the superfluous elements, would it also have been a choice? On your example with the superfluous elements, would it also have been a choice to combine those two charts at the bottom and actually, showed a stacked line type chart?
That is one option. I'm not a particular fan of stacked bar charts. In this case, it would probably work because I'm not trying.
A bar and line chart is what I meant.
Yeah, or a bar and line. You could, but then you lose the comparison there of the authorized versus the actual, as well as the cross-category comparison, right? Because if I used a line and combined it, and then if I tried to use side-by-side, charts with different colors, like 4 different colors, then it kind of makes you go wonky because you're going to try to compare across geography, which isn't really the issue here. That's not what we're trying to convey. We're just simply trying to convey that at each of these largest prisons in the state of Alabama, what the state is. So I'm not saying you couldn't do it. It would just be, it'd probably be harder for somebody to actually pick up on what you were trying to tell them. Anybody else? Oh.
Back to the Alabama prison situation and using the narrative text up in the upper left, is that element put there in terms of trying to solicit a reaction or response, or was it more informational just to how to interpret the graph?
Yeah. In this particular case, it was to try to be evocative, to generate a response, right? I don't know. I swipe these visualizations off the web, like everybody else. I grab screenshots of this particular one. So in this particular one, it was definitely sounded like it was basically like somebody trying to make a pitch. And so yes, that's the reason that I left it in the upper left, because what you're trying to do oftentimes, particularly in sales, if anybody's ever sold for a living around here, is you try to make it easy to make the right decision, and you do that by setting the stage and hopefully with an emotional hook. And so in this case, that's what that narrative is there for, is simply to set the stage. We have a severe problem, and they're talking about a systemic problem. Now let me show you individually that it's the same at every single one of these prisons. That it's not like just one prison is understaffed and overpopulated. They all are. And so I think that that's where the visualization helps support that narrative and that story. Anybody else? Oh,
In the future, if you were to redo it, would you integrate the pictures and the text more together? Because generally speaking, when I look at something, my eyes go to the pictures, and I never read the text.
Right. And again, I think to your point, if this is like a business use case that wasn't part of a pitch, and obviously this was more than likely part of a pitch, I would agree with you. I would put text at the bottom or on the right-hand side, maybe at the top if it's like directions. Then I probably want it in that first horizontal scan, that somebody goes, oh, okay, this is how I do this, or this is what it's telling me, if it's not blatantly obvious by what's being presented. I would agree with you that, yes, I would do that. And I think that that's you bring up an important part to really think about, which is who is the audience and what story are you trying to tell? For a lot of the business use dashboards that we do on a day-to-day basis, you're doing operational type things. You're not using them as, it's more of like a check to make sure that suddenly you don't have some wild outlier come up and suddenly your defects per 1,000 has gone through the roof, right? You're looking for trending over time. But it's also to make the point, and this is kind of like a subtle point, of infographics are designed to tell a story and evoke a response. Whereas a lot of the actual dashboards that we do in business are designed to tell a completely different kind of story. And so it really depends on your audience. But yes, generally that would be off to the side somewhere on the right-hand side. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I hope that I kept us on time. Yes, all right.